The fish fossils on top
the
of
fish
Mount
fossils.
Everest.
What do they say about?
Well, they just say that those are pushed up over slowly over millions of years.
Pushed up.
Sorry, I lost.
Wait,
that's fine.
pushed up to the top of Mount
it's
Everest.
windy or
Well, they
something?
believe the plate movement is really slow, and you have this
Okay.
slow movement of just a couple inches per year, and slowly you push these things up, and the Himalayas are still growing today by a little bit of inch or so.
Okay,
a
so
year.
this is
So there's still
debris
some
from
activity.
millions and millions
Right.
of years
And
ago.
But one thing they don't address is why about 80% of the world's mountains all form at the same time, which is all within what I believe is the receding phase of the flood.
Right.
During what's called the Cenozoic, or these other terms they throw out to the Tertiary. Just before the Ice Age, all these mountains pop up: the Andes, the Rockies, the Himalayas, the Alps. Almost all the mountains all show up at the same time, and there's no explanation for that really of why all these things happen simultaneously all over the world, other than this a global phenomenon, which I believe is associated with the global flood. That's part of the rebounding, kind of the Earth had all these things being moved rapidly, real rapid plate movement during the flood year, disrupted the mantle a lot and caused a lot of movement up and down of a lot of the mountains. So most of Wyoming's mountains and Utah's mountains all formed very, very late in the flood year, and they've pushed a lot of fossil-rich sediments all the way up, thousands of feet up.
So someone just sent me this, and if you can't speak to this, then that's cool. But they just sent me a Forbes article from 3 days ago. The headline is, "Oil is going to $300 a barrel." So, I mean, back in 2008, as the article says, we ended up just below $200 a barrel. Can you speak to where the price of oil is going to go, in your opinion?
Well, it's going to go up and down. So it could spike, but it's going to come back down because I got laid off when it was down. I mean, in 92, they laid all the oil companies laid people off because it was sitting around $12 a barrel, and they couldn't make any money. So they got rid of most of their exploration, and I was one of them. But that allowed me to get my PhD, and so I would never got my PhD if
Everything happens for a reason, Doc.
And I believe that allowed me to get into ICR and do the research I'm doing now.
So did you always believe as you do now, or did you come to that somewhere along the line in your
I always
career?
kind of believed it because I read Henry Morris and John Whitcomb's book as a high school kid with my brothers growing up in Michigan. We read the Genesis flood, and we saw that there was some evidence, that isn't being talked about in the schools of the global flood from the geologic standpoint. And I was just a nerdy kid, hoeing beans in the fields and picking up fossils, but to me,
that's what you do in Michigan.
It always kind of kept me, kind of grounded. And there's another story here that are not being told. So I went through all this school, evolution, and millions of years, and I just kept thinking there's another side to this. But it wasn't until I came to ICR that I was able to really dive into it full time and start really digging into it and saying there really is strong evidence that there was a global flood. That's what the rocks really do show.
And at your time at the oil companies, I mean, there had to have been plenty of times when you were like, no, guys, this is not right.
Well, that's like in Wyoming, they said the oil is 150 million years old, just sitting there. Just sitting there all this time, we just tap into it, and it's still under pressure. How can pressures maintain that long as well? And so you hit these overpressured zones, and all that stuff screams young. The Earth's not that old. The rocks are deposited really rapidly.
Right.
So there's still high pressured zones.
I mean, we're told that fossil fuels are so dirty, and we've got to transition to green. How much does it affect our pollution and the environment?
Well, that's a good point, because if you look up some graphs and charts that I talk about, actually our air pollution has gone down considerably since 1970.
Oh, yeah.
And so even though we're burning all these things, even our CO2 output has gone down in recent years. And so what they're telling you and what's really happening, and even two different things, the deaths due to climate problems, climate issues and catastrophes from the climate. If you go back to 1900 to now, they've dropped considerably.
Yep.
But they're not telling people that. They're telling you this narrative that they want to tell you that oil's bad, and and it is if you don't burn it cleanly. If you burn coal and just let it go, like China's doing, and other countries are just burning out there, and everything's becoming
and like we used to, like before we learned.
In England, everything was covered in soot. I kid around and say the pictures we used to take in the 19th century were colored pictures, but they were covered in black and white. So it's not really true, but I think I heard that in The Simpsons.
It's not? Weird.
I think I heard that from Homer Simpson one time. But, I learned everything from Homer Simpson. So.
Last week we talked a little bit about the soft tissue in dinosaurs being found. And so after the show, I looked up, okay, well, how do you explain that as a secular scientist? And they explained it by iron deposits in
Right.
the blood of the dinosaurs. Well, don't we all have iron deposits? That keeps the tissue soft for 65 million years?
Again, it's kind of magic. But there's a lot of things that have been found there in worm fossils, for example, that are supposed to be 500 million years old. There's no blood iron to drench these things. There's other areas of the body where there's no iron to drench and preserve these things. And the experiment she did was only a 2-year experiment. And she didn't really do a lot of chemical tests at the end. She just said, this one looks more decayed than this one. And so in some ways, it might have preserved things a little better. But you don't have that iron everywhere.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these animals that we're finding these things in, not just dinosaurs, but things that are supposedly hundreds of millions of years older, that there's no iron to bathe them in. And so they throw that out there like they got the solution. But it's really just a rescuing device that because that's all they have.
Yeah.
You know,
It's amazing on how many issues they do that.
Jack Horner,
incredible.
the paleontologist, even said in his book about 10 years ago, he said, the creationists are going to love this. And of course we do, because it really is
Right.
Compelling evidence. There's been over 120 published papers now that have found different discoveries at different levels throughout the rocks, all the fossils, and they all show the same thing: the preserved proteins, preserved blood vessels, preserved hemoglobin, all these different. Don't know enough biology to know rattle off all these the names, but that's the same thing oil is. Oil is organic deposits from marine algae. Oil, that's why it burns. It's organic. It should be gone. If it's really millions of years old, there shouldn't be any oil.